Turns out, for a while, these have been set up as private. I did not know that. Hopefully, now I can actually start getting views. Oh well. Well, welcome back. Today's going to be a return to form. My last few projects have been astounding failures because I was trying something new, which is using the paint knife primarily to paint. I'm going to go back and do landscape, so it's going to be return to form with landscape, paintbrushes, and sketching first. It's going to be a little forest with a lot of red foliage. I started off with the low horizon line because it's actually going to be just about entirely foliage and ground. There's going to be almost no sky in it. It is kind of disappointing to not have a sky in it because that's my favorite part of painting, is painting the sky however I want and doing it my design, but it's not so bad. The trees in the front are going to be far more prominent, so those are the ones that I drew in. The road is going to be unique. It took a few sketches to figure out how I wanted to do it. I used two references, one for the shape and one for how I'm going to color it and how I'm going to detail it. But brand new thing of towels, and they actually, even though these are really old, like about a year old, maybe two, still working just fine. Oh, shop towels. Way better to use than regular paper towels because you can use them for longer. Especially, it treats the what's it called, the brushes better than to use regular paper towels with more fibers in them. These actually are more sturdy and last longer. Plus, like my last one lasted me, 10 paintings? So, it's not bad. So, back to actually painting. I started off with a mute kind of gray, grayish blue, because the actual color isn't going to matter. If I need to change it later, I will, but this is just going to be a placeholder so that I can have that pocket of sky behind the leaves. It's going to be barely visible, but that's okay. That's actually exactly what I want. After that, I moved on to the bushes. The color was kind of hard for me to get. It was a kind of like yellowish orange with a more gray base, because that was what the texture and color of the ground was. From there I can move on to the trees, which because of the rest of the color, it made sense to have the trees be a bit more of a deep black, almost black. It was a deep blue, almost black, and the background would kind of not have to be so defined because it was outside of the foreground, the part that was actually supposed to be the attention, which was the tree branches and the leaves. The trees that go along the hillside, I didn't really want to be as visible. Besides, it's harder to do detail on something as small as those would be. And it would definitely be very hard to keep the shape of trees in the background consistent and looking like they're the same size. I don't know if oil is the same, but I know at least for acrylic, making thin lines with acrylic is very difficult. So I wasn't really wanting to focus on that too much. Here I was fighting to keep as much of the blue out of the background as possible. I added too much, and I was trying to sort of mellow it out so that it'd be more consistent with the rest of the work. This was the part I really enjoyed because I gotta get kind of wild with it. Doing the leaves is a fairly repetitive task, but when you get in the rhythm of it, it gets kind of fun. Splotching in each leaf and trying not to mix it in with the paint before was a challenge, but when you just dip your brush into the paint, the wet paint you have on your palette, and then tap it on to create the leaf, it's really quick, and with it's somewhat mixing with the other colors you're using, and the color in the background adds more texture to the leaves more than you would think. Doing the leaves was fun in the same way that doing the flames on the skull I did on the last published one, I think. Um, the way that I enjoyed that one because I got to just rotate from red to yellow to orange and just go back and forth and adding what I thought was right. This is very sped up though because this took me a long time and it was close to this point that I was looking at the other side of the painting and realizing as fun as this is, do I really want to do 3 times this? The ground following and beside the road was fairly consistent and was very similar to the way I did the highway one, where you pick the same colors basically that you've been using the same for the leaves, and you mix in a little bit more of ground colors, like deepening the orange to create more of a brown, and graying it out a little bit, just a little bit, and mixing that in, and kind of swishing it through, almost in an S shape. On the other side, I wanted to highlight and bring out the side because it is an opening where the road goes through, so I wanted to have some sense of shading. So on the left, I kept it on a deeper color, and on the right, I added more highlights. Ignore this section because I screwed up by looking at the wrong reference. The road I wanted to be was kind of a gray tarmac color, but I was looking at the sand path by accident. Luckily, acrylic dries fairly quickly, so I was able to fix it up. And in fact, the parts I started with, it helped that it was still a little bit wet because then I could get some highlights in through incident rather than without actually having to work for it. So the one side of the road I wanted to keep slightly highlighted, a little bit shiny, as if it were still wet, and then on the other side I wanted to deepen it and add more grit to it. For the rest of it, I was ready to move on to doing the ground, the kind of bush part next to the trees, and finish up the leaves on top of the other one. This part, I had to get kind of a deeper color because for some reason the reference work I was going off of did that, and I think that there must have been a reason for it, so I just ran with what the reference had. I kept the right side a bit more of a deeper green, and then I mixed in the colors of the leaves and a little bit more yellows and orange, but I used a base kind of grayed out green. From here, I was ready to move on to some of the more details, some of the highlights, and some of the shine that wasn't visible before. Highlights are magic in that suddenly it becomes a lot more deep of it, everything else gets a lot more deep in hue just from highlights. And to contrast the highlights, I defined the trees and branches a bit more to add more detail to them and to distinguish the trees a little bit more because it started to seem a little bit muddy. I took a risk and smudged the entire bush because I still wasn't happy with it and I kind of wanted to restart. But smudging it helped add a little bit more texture to it before I added more of the details. Finally, I just had to do the center line in the road, my own touch because it wasn't in either reference, but I really like the yellow lines for some reason. And that'll do it for this one. It was one of my... it was right down the middle of time. It wasn't my longest, it wasn't my quickest, but thank you for watching. Thank you for watching.